All right. So first of all, just welcome everybody on here. Obviously, this is something that we'll try to do throughout the summer a handful of times. We did it back with some of my staff back in the winter break. We did 4 or 5 of them, and they were pretty good. So it's definitely something that I look forward to. Just number one, reconnecting with some of the coaches that I've worked with and that kind of helped me get to where I'm at, and um, get introduce them to you guys, and kind of helping everybody build their network and get to know each other a little bit and hear from different strength coaches. So first of all, obviously introducing Ryan. Ryan's the director of strength conditioning at Pro. Obviously, he'll kind of give us a little more insight into what that role actually means. But really for me, Ryan's starting the summer off with us. Him and I have basically been at Pro and been whatever you want to call it, colleagues, friends. I mean, training partners for I guess it's been 10 years now, essentially from almost the start of my career as a strength coach. So it's one of those things where super appreciative of everything that he's done and helped me with, and um, all the questions and conversations that we've had that have made us both better strength coaches, and hopefully we'll have some more of those today. But Ryan, just appreciate it and welcome on here, and go ahead and kind of just give everybody basically what your title is at Pro, and what your main responsibilities and your role is, and what that just your job entails.
Yeah, so the official title is, Director of Strength and Conditioning, and then I also have to help manage some of the fitness side, which for the most part it kind of takes care of itself. I mean, I let Steve do his thing, and when you hire good people, you don't have to worry too much about what they do. Like Mike splits his time between fitness and strength and conditioning, so I check in with him once or twice a week. It's super easy. John works Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so I talk to him every day. So I mean, really, my role is a lot of, I mean, being a director, right? That's why you have a director title versus, say, like a head coach versus a manager or coordinator, all the different levels. Even like in baseball, Adam, you saw where it's like coordinator, manager, blah, blah, blah. Like director, you're supposed to be able to tell people what to do and set people on projects themselves and just oversee and manage them. But I also have to have a hands on because Pro is a big place, but it's still a small company. So it's pretty much just always trying to grow and make the place as good as it can be. I mean, that's really my role. I mean, when Adam and I first started at Pro at the same time, I mean, yeah, it's been almost a decade. I mean, nothing that we have in that 3,000 square foot space where all the interns come in existed. Like that was CrossFit at the time. Like you would have never even imagined that. We were literally doing groups like in the corner on the turf field, reserving racks in the main room, like kicking regular members out of there that would go and move your stuff. I mean, it was chaos. I don't know how they managed it before, but we did so well that they moved us upstairs to where we expanded and continued to grow that. And then we continued to do so well, and CrossFit wasn't doing as well, so they condensed them back into one space. And now we have our own, which has allowed us to pretty much grow into what you see today. So we've been down there since 2019. Crazy to think it's been about 5 years. Yeah, actually 5 years in April. And now that's why you see this full fledged internship program that's in combination with Adam and Pro and FSU and everything. That's why you also see a real solid internship and our summer programs. And there's just a lot of little things that we do that, I mean, is different than I'd say a lot of places because we have private, semi private group, we have summer camps, we have our little talks, we have education components. I don't know. I think we do a lot and we have a lot of insight that a lot of people don't see just because it's so unique to the area.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, just me and you basically being the only ones other than people in the fitness side and like Rob, the GM, and stuff like that. But other than that, it's just me and you. That's obviously I've been in and out for various points of the last 10 years, but just the difference in just the mindset and the type of culture or whatever you want to kind of call it, it is so different from when we started. Like I think I started like a month before you took over as a director, and like just the way that we were even scheduling things and just how inefficient things were. I had this like later on in one of my questions, but since we kind of are already going down that path a little bit, if you can go back, like I said, it's hard to go back 10 years and remember anything, but if you can go back like 10 years when you first got there, and you can kind of just think about like, okay, here was the things that number one we needed to fix. And I know that this doesn't help everybody because we're not all going to end up being in private sector and things like that. But even just from just the strength coach, just the managing side of things of like getting stuff to be more efficient. Cause I had to do this with Fairmount too. But like, what was the things that you came in and were like, okay, like this is kind of our vision. This is definitely our main like paths to growth. This is how we need to make sure we're just more efficient, whether that's time wise, like money wise, like economic, like getting more athletes in there. And obviously getting our own space was a huge factor in that, and just kind of how all of those discussions even take place. It's basically like, kind of what your elevator sales pitch on how all of that came from 10 years ago at Pro, where we were barely, from kind of what I remember, it was kind of touch and go whether we were even going to survive, versus
Yep.
now where you guys have 100 volleyball girls that are going. I saw where you're doing that, basically combine testing here in a couple of weeks with 100 different volleyball girls. Like, how do we get from where we were to where we are now in 10 years?
And so, yeah, when I first came here, I was like, holy shit, this place is a mess. And not to be rude, but that's just how the guy that was there before me set things up, because the way his contract was motivating for him to have a bunch of people do other things like personal training sessions. So his contract was like, hey, he gets 10% of all sessions. So he's like, I don't give a shit. Like, whatever the quality is, just go do stuff, just pipe him in, pipe him out. So that way he could pretty much do whatever he wanted. And no offense to Brian, very nice guy, but the knowledge wasn't there either from that revenue. He's very good at talking to people and very salesy per se, I'd say. And the first thing I did when I came in, I was like, we have to raise our standard of coaching. And I'd say, honestly, Adam was the only other one that knew how to really coach there. Everybody else was like, hey, I kind of like strength and conditioning and I was an athlete. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? So it was kind of like a cleaning house, to where it's like, okay, here's our mission. This is what we want to do. And basically, Adam and I just got together and we're like, hey, these are the only people that are running groups. And I kind of took everybody else and I was like, all right, we're going to slowly, this sounds bad. I slowly pushed them away and out, and they got other jobs because they didn't meet the standard of what we had. And I knew, I couldn't come in right away and just fire everybody and be like, all right, see you, like, you don't make the cut, because you still need to be nice to everything and they have relationships with athletes. But I mean, pretty much the first thing I did is I came in and said, this is how we coach and this is the standards, and, really got to know everybody and cut all the stuff that was just not worth it. Like, we'd have groups with one or two people, and I'm like, all right, well, we can't have that. So you just have those hard conversations with the parents. And same thing happens in the collegiate sector. A coach gets fired, a whole new staff comes in, and you have to set things up for what you do well. So it's like, if I'm the head guy, I had to set everything up to what, like, I knew how to coach, and that way people follow you because you have the passion for that. If you don't know what the hell you're doing, people know that deep down. Like, that's just what you have to come into. And we actually started with just baseball groups, and they started with 4 people in one group, and that's what grew, because they knew that they got results. They trusted us. We had a response to every question that they asked because we actually knew what we're doing, versus in the past that wasn't there. So it was really just to come in and completely revamp everything. And Rob, my boss, from our first meeting, he was like, all right, I trust you, do whatever you need to. And he really just let me run with it. And that's why we were successful, is because he's like, hey, I trust you, just do that. Because semi-private didn't even exist back then, which is, the small group training. One, it wasn't feasible with what we have and the prior setup without having space. But it just, I'd say the elevator thing was coming in and be like, this is how you guys actually coach. This is what we need to do. And then over time, that's what allowed us to evolve. And then Cody, I saw him just going around and doing stuff that I was like, this guy actually knows what he's doing. He was one of the next first hires that I brought in, to where he was able to help take that same thing. Like, when Adam moved away, like, Cody really stepped up. And then we had another guy kind of the same situation that interned. His name was Carter. And that's where we started to really grow, is when we kept hiring good people that were in the same culture and the same mission. So you have to go and define to make sure everybody's in the same boat, not exactly to hire the same person as you. You want to hire people that have your weaknesses, but still share that same vision. When I draw on the whiteboard, right, I do a big circle, and then, like, I might be over here and somebody might be over there, but we also have to be within that circle, right? And we're trying to all get closer to the bullseye, which is, say, the perfect coach. But if people are outside that, those are just small cancers that you have on your staff. And you see that at all levels, even at WVU. Like, Mike Joseph just finally fired a guy that he went to the same college as me. He was younger. Like, I didn't think that he was that great of a product just because he played football. And he finally cut him, and, the level just jumped up. And that's the thing, is like, when people are part of that same mission, you grow. And people can drift in and out. You can get closer, you can get further away. Not everybody's always, statically in one spot. People are dynamic, right? And they're also reactive and emotional. So you could have a good day and a bad day, but if most of those days are in the circle, you're great. But if everybody slowly gets out that, then it's time to, reevaluate things and make sure that they're a good fit. And that's what took us, I'd say, from being mediocre to great. And that's how people trust us. And that's why we have 100 plus volleyball girls, is actually because of Mike, who I hired, who was willing to do the internship for free, where a lot of people don't do that now. Mike's been one of the best hires I've ever had, because He gets it. He trusts it. He still wants to learn. And he came from a different background, right? He didn't have this at all, but he did the internship and fit the mold and has still continued to grow. And a relationship that he had with one of his clients who happened to be a volleyball coach, she trusted him. Well, guess what? She has her own team. Well, then it got word to the head coach. And then some other stuff happened where a rival club kind of branched off of theirs, and so they needed to compete. Well, we're a deciding factor to help them compete against these other teams to where people want to play with them versus the other club. And that's how we got them. They're sticking with us and they liked what we did in the off season. So that's why we have the combine stuff that we're going to test, because if they have two athletes that they're not sure about, one of the deciding factors, like, how are they with us? Are they a better athlete? And then that's going to help them make better decisions for their team. So it's a win-win, right? What is it? Rising tides raise all boats. So that's the long-winded soapbox spiel of 10 years ago to now.
Yeah, no, I think it was good. There, there was a bunch of times where I wanted to like jump in and be like, yeah, I remember that because I honestly, again, it's so much has happened with like my career kind of going all over the place and stuff. But you know, thinking back to just how chaotic it was from the get go, and we had, I mean, I feel like honestly, whenever by the time you got hired for the month that I was there before you got hired, I feel like we had almost as many strength coaches, I'm gonna put that in quotes, as we did athletes. Like there'd be times where we'd have like 7 or 8 strength coaches, and there'd be times where you'd show up to pro and they'd all be sitting around in the main lobby doing nothing or in the office just hanging out, and there'd be like 3 athletes there to train. And it was like, what are we doing? Like, there's no way that we were making enough money to really survive. So just kind of coming in and, like you said, just letting those coaches that thought they were strength coaches and letting them know like, hey, look, you're not really, here's the standards we're going to have, and you're either going to like follow it or you're going to end up just kind of falling to the wayside. And that's pretty much what happened. And it basically got to the point where it was at one point in time, it was basically me, you, and Dom, and then Andrew, and then it was me, you, and, or basically I was gone, it was you and Cody and Dom, and then it was you and Cody and Carter, and now it's you, Tyler, and um Brooke and Mike. And it's like, it's just one of those things where like you got to find the people that are going to kind of really fit with what your message is. And again, that's something that obviously is any job for that matter. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. That's one of the other questions that I have. And then there was something else that you mentioned. Oh, like again, you mentioned Mike. I do. As much as I don't really get to talk to Mike as much anymore without being around him. But when he was in the internship, again, he's at least what our age. He's in his 30s for sure, right? Is he older than us?
No, I think he's 32. I'll have to ask
So
him, but yeah,
he's a couple
he's
years.
between 30 and 35.
Yeah, he's a couple years younger than us, but it's one of those things where not very many 30-year-olds are willing to take an unpaid internship, with no real end in sight. Like he had an idea of what he wanted to do. So it's one of those things where, that's something for all of you that are 22 when Mike's 32, and you guys are bitching and moaning about, I'm not getting paid for this or I'm not getting paid for that. Like, yeah, I understand that. And don't get me wrong. Like I hate the fact that strength and conditioning doesn't have more money just being thrown around, but it also gets, it gets rid of the people that don't really want to do this profession. And again, there's pros and cons of that. Again, like I said, I hate it, but I love it at the same time. Many of you that have been around me, that, if you think that you're in this to make a lot of money, you're in it for the wrong thing. And you should probably just leave this meeting right now and go find something else. Like honestly, like that's really the reality of it. And again, I'm not saying that's a good thing. I wish it wasn't that way, but that's just that is the reality. And in the back of my mind, sometimes I'm like, that is, going to make the people that really want to do it stick around, and those that don't, they'll leave. They'll find a path of less resistance. So let's even go back even further then, because obviously you have ties with Bobby at Cal, which at some point in time he's going to be on one of these calls. So go back and just kind of tell us, just so everybody on here knows, because I know, I know Noah and I have talked about the idea of maybe him having like his own private gym or something at some point in time, which I think at some point every young strength coach kind of thinks of that's kind of their all in goal. But kind of go back even further on of like, what your undergrad master's program, how your GA position at Cal went, and kind of some of those bigger lessons that you took from Bobby. Because I know every time I ever talk to Bobby, he makes me feel like I don't know anything about myself or strength conditioning. But kind of go back to even further before pro, just kind of what got you to pro and what basically made you qualified and had enough experience to become the director at pro.
Yeah, so here's the whole path. So I went to Ohio University for undergrad, athletic training, did some strength conditioning, right? Did normal 4 years. Probably could have done a little bit more, but it's a party school like WVU. You go out, you do stuff, and you learn. You're like, all right, well, I need to really buckle it down, do some more. So I did not end up taking a GA ship. Some other stuff happened down there where because I was going to go to Valdosta State in Georgia. It was a 2-year program. But anyways, I was like, all right, well, I'm going to take a year break. So I graduated from OU. I worked 3 different jobs at the time. So I worked at a place called Ignition Sports Performance in Cincinnati, Ohio, which is pretty much what pro is, but they have more pro athletes because they're in Cincinnati. And Cliff Marshall, who was there at the time, was an old Bengals strength coach. So it was also like the lockout year too. So we got a ton of Bengals guys in there, Reds guys, just because it's right there. And he'd been in the game forever. I think he's at Indiana basketball actually right now, but he used to be a strength coach there. So we'd get all these pro athletes in and out. So I'd be there from usually about 10:30 to about 2. And then I was a per diem athletic trainer. So, because I did get licensed as an athletic trainer. So then I would go to a high school and work from pretty much 2 to 5 or 2 to 7, depending on what they needed covered, because 2 guys were out. One guy, I forget what he had, but the other lady, she, had a baby. So I had a steady position with that. And then I would basically nap, and then I'd go work on the docks of FedEx. So I'd work, loading, well, it was FedEx freight. So I'd go and load 53-foot trucks till about 2, 3 a.m. Then I would nap and go back to work at Ignition. And I did that for a year. But during that time, I was like, all right, this isn't for me. I got to find a way to make this work because I still want to do strength and conditioning. So I had applied to grad school during that time. But also while I was at Ignition, they saw some hope and promise with me there. And since I had strength and conditioning athletic training, there was an opportunity because the Olympics was coming up in 2012. They sent a bunch of D League guys and myself over to China and Dominican Republic and a couple other places to pretty much have a bunch of exhibition games. So like they played the Chinese national team, the Dominican Republic's team. Like everybody knows Coach Calipari, he was coaching their team at the time. So I got a lot of cool experience with that because they're like, hey, this person can go be an athletic trainer, strength coach. So we don't have to pay 2 people to do this. We can pay 1 person and make it easier because I mean it saves a shit ton of money. I know the tickets to China were over $2,000 each. So it's like, would you rather pay $4,000 or $2,000? This person, we trust that they can do both roles. But again, that doesn't pay the bills. It just, they spend all that and they give you like $500 a month as a stipend, which is cool. But, I still got to take care of other stuff. So I decided, I applied to grad school during that year. I did get into Cal UPA because OU has some connection with Cal where they've always sent students there and they had a good relationship where like, hey, we trust these people. So I got into the Cal. So I went there and pretty much that's when I met Bobby. Like they were showing us all around. They took us in the weight room. They're like, hey, this is, this guy was like, hey, workouts tomorrow at 6 a.m. So basically I showed up, had my GA ship dual where I did sports performance and athletic training. So I went out to Penn State Fayette for half the day. And I also worked the other half the day at Cal plus my classes. So, I mean, I had a lot of shit going on, but you just have to find ways to honestly make it work. And it sucks, but you can run off sleep when you're a little bit younger. Adam and I both have kids now and kids suck. Like it's even, I'd say it's worse with sleep now than ever, but I pretty much did a really good job at Cal. And that's the thing. You just got to show up every day, like ready to do a good job and you want to do well. And Bobby's the type of person, like, you just don't want to disappoint him. Like, I don't know what it is or his whole, like, sensei type stuff, but it works every time. I still show up 10 years later. I'm like, Jesus, like, he makes you really think and want to be better. And that's the thing for like a good boss leader is you want to do better. So I was at Cal for that year. And then after Cal, I got a job all the way in Mechanicsburg, PA, which it's a private sector gym where in that area, it's super densely populated. Um, and I mean, we're talking like Cumberland Valley has over 1,000 kids in the class. Cedar Cliff has 600 plus. Carlisle has 600 plus. Mechanicsburg has 600 plus, and these are all within. If you've been in Morgantown, like UHS, MHS, so the same land area, but imagine like 2 more schools in that same distance. With the Cumberland Valley is 4 times the size of Morgantown High School, so you get a ton of really good athletes. So I was there for 3 years, and I was just training a shit ton of like every level, Division 1, 2, 3 athletes. The entire starting lineup, for instance, for Cumberland Valley soccer, all went Division 1, like because you're 1 out of 1,000. Like you're just going to get it out of numbers. But honestly, my boss there was kind of terrible, and that's why I think that I'm a better and more easygoing uh, director right now because he was so bad that after 3 years, I was like, I got to find a way to move up, do different stuff. And Bobby randomly actually called me and said, hey, there's a position open at Pro. because another guy went to Cal. Brad Wright was a manager at the time. He's like, hey, you got anybody that you think would be a good fit? And Bobby actually referred me to that. And so Rob called me and brought me in, interviewed me, and then offered me the job right after the interview. Like that's the whole way it works. And I have some top level experience with a lot of high level guys, but I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that it's hard. Like it's easier to coach really good guys. It's really hard to coach 8 to 12 year olds. So I'd say my job coaching now with some of these kids is harder to get them to do what you want versus some of these kids that are Division 1 prospects and some of these pro guys. You just tell them to do shit and you make the small adjustment and it makes everything better. But that's kind of what led me to pro, was just pretty much everywhere I went, making impacts, making good relationships, telling people my thoughts, and not doing it, I'd say, too abrasively where you're still talking to these people. Like I have a reunion I'm going to go to Mechanicsburg, let's see, June 1st, and meet up with old staff there just because they all want to get together. So it's form good relationships everywhere you are. It'll lead you to other places. If you're in a bad place, like find a way. You got to get out of there. You might have to suck it up for whatever your contract is, but don't be afraid to move. But when you find a good place, right, you can make it uniquely your own. I've been at pro, for almost 10 years, but I've also grown it to be an environment that I want to be at every day and around people that I want to be around, and make it an environment where other people want to be a part of that. And the thing is, like, that's important. You have to make things uniquely your own, and that's going to help you a lot in life. And things aren't ever going to be perfect either, but you still have to make the best of them each day and pretty much just show up to be the person that and the coach that you think you are, and reevaluate every day. I'm not a great coach every day. I'm not going to lie. Some days I come in tired and I need to be better, but that's just the reality of how things are. So another soapbox spiel.
No, it's good. I think it's, and again, some of it leads into like other questions I already have on my list. Anyway, I think some of the biggest ones there is like you never like you can have this. I don't know if you guys can hear the baby screaming right now, by the way, or not, but um, you can have this like grand plan of like, okay, in 3 years I want to be here, in 5 years I want to be here, in 10 years I want to be here, but you really just don't. You don't know. Like you never know like what the next job is going to be. You never know like 5 years from now who's going to call you and randomly be like, oh, you remember when you worked for this person? Well, I'm here now. Like maybe you come take this job, like whatever it may be. So I think there's just a lot to learn from that, of just and all the interns that are on here have either just done it this past week or have done it in the past couple of years. That Megan Young video, which I know all of you guys hopefully remember what I'm talking about from the internship packet, where she talks about like you don't really know what your plan is. Like everybody's strength and conditioning plan or their coaching progression is completely different than the next person, and what you think is going to happen isn't always what happens. But being able to kind of just go with the flow and never burn any bridges, and always be open-minded to taking opportunities and things like that, I think that's huge. And I know we're going to have Bobby on here at some point, but the thing with Bobby that I always have to laugh at is like, of the people that I know that have worked with him, yourself included, like they all end up being successful. And probably the two best examples of are our women's basketball coaches. Like we have
Yep.
that's literally one of our best programs at Fairmont State, just as a team, and just the culture and the type of accountability that they have and the leadership that they have and all that kind of stuff. And both of those girls, ladies now, but they both played for Bobby, or they both had Bobby as a string coach when they were playing at Cal. So I think there's definitely that's not a coincidence in my opinion. It's just the type of people that kind of matriculate to a place like that and play for somebody like him, or train under somebody like him. Um, the other thing that you mentioned about well, let me go back to this and then I'll ask that other question. So you mentioned about being an athletic trainer. You know, the injury, decreasing injuries and all that, injury mitigation, whatever fancy kind of term. If you listen to Buddy Morris talk about it, it's not real anyways. There's no such thing as injury prevention and injury mitigation, which I think there's some truth to that. I think we can make some ground only to trying to do our part. But from an athletic training's lens, which I know you haven't done that in that capacity in a long time, but just from that lens and what you took from that knowledge, and then now being a strength coach and those kind of things, like what role do you really think that we do play in injury prevention? How much do we play, if any? What kind of should our thought process be? I have my own kind of opinions on it, but I want to hear what yours are.
I'd say the biggest takeaway that helped me, and I'd say why athletic training is so good, is it just allows you to understand what's going on. Like I can do the special testing, like, all right, well, this guy's ACL is torn, or we have an LCL going on. We have this muscle strain or whatever is kind of happening. It just lets me decipher that and then take my strength and conditioning knowledge, be like, okay, this and this are okay. This we don't need to do. And just understanding the, say, injury process. Okay, well, it's like, for instance, if you break a bone, right, it's not just all of a sudden healed. It's like, okay, you have a soft callus, a hard callus, and then it finally reforms. And it's like, why those things happen. And still questioning those, because when I was taught back in the day, it was like, hey, ice, can't really go wrong with it. May not help, may not hurt. And we've continued to evolve where sometimes, ice is not appropriate. I ruptured both my Achilles tendons separate times. I actually didn't use ice one time in either of them. And right as of now, hopefully knock on wood, doesn't change today, but I had no issues. Same thing when I had meniscus done. Like I just used compression, moved, like movement is medicine. I think things do slowly evolve, but the core of what I was taught for athletic training, a lot of those things really, really help. And the emergency response, that's a thing. Like I did some internships where it was a lot of action sports. So BMX, motocross, skateboarding, where you see these huge traumas like femurs, like spine issues. Like I saw somebody fracture their C3, C4, and they poop their pants and they pee themselves. That's when you go, oh shit, we got to get a life flight. Like having those incidents help you remain calm. Where it's like when I do strength conditioning, I'm like, none of this shit's gonna go bad. And even if it does, like somebody drops a bar in their head, like the worst case scenario what to do. So it just brings a calmness to you. But in general, athletic training, if you go to a good school, and I'm gonna say this right now, there's a lot of shitty athletic trainers. And especially if you guys are at, I mean, Fairmont, you've had your fair share. Like, there's a lot of shitty athletic trainers, and that's another reason I got out of it. It just sounds bad, but where I went to school is one of the best schools that you can in the country for athletic training. They have a high graduation rate. They have higher standards, and I think both strength and conditioning and athletic training, we need to raise that. For instance, here's the setup for athletic training in OU. When I was there, athletic training 1-on-ones fall quarter. It was quarters then. Um, there was like 100 110 I think students. Okay, by spring, okay, if you don't pass that first class, you're done. Right now you can take it again the next year, but that's it. So you have to make that cut first. We went from like 100 to 60. Then same thing happens winter and spring, and then spring they do interviews and they only take 20. Right, so it's like you either get in through the interview or you don't, or you go back next year. And that's the thing, is you got 20 kids out of 100, and guess what, 18 or 19 of them graduated and passed. One or two kind of trickle off or some other random stuff happens, but that's a high success rate because you weeded that out. Same thing in strength and conditioning. And this is just me putting this out there, is I think we need to have one national level thing, kind of like athletic training does, where it's like both practical and on paper or pen, whatever you want to call it, but you need to have two components of it. And that'll raise the standard of all that. But athletic training, I think, just really helps with understanding that there's levels, understanding like all this other background knowledge just to the body in general, because it's you intern a ton of hours and you have to understand these things, and you do a human cadaver lab and you have to know all this anatomy stuff. And I think that just applies to doing some of the exercise better and being creative with it. But I would say athletic training is a good stepping stone to other stuff as well, but there's a lot of bad programs too. And no offense to, like, I know a lot of people are ex-phys and other stuff, but like at least ex-phys at WVU, like they're not taking 1,000 plus intern hours. They're doing 45, 90, 180, where it's like, I don't think that that's enough. So you should search out to do more, but the minimum standard is too low. And, I took anatomy classes basically every semester for 3 years. So it's like, okay, your knowledge is just there. So it's like, we just need to do more, and things become so much easier once you do it more and more. Just like you groove a squat, right? If I practice a low bar back squat, at first it's going to suck and my shoulders are going to be tight. But then over time, I squat and squat and squat. That greasing the groove and the patterning of that is going to be so much better. And that applies to literally everything. I mean, the myelination and the nerves in your brain, even mirror neurons, like all this stuff applies to it. So when you break it out and universally understand these things, that's where athletic training, I think, helped me take that to strength conditioning, even though it's been a really long time.
Yeah, I think a couple of big things there. Number one is, and for me, this is kind of what I was, and you said it with, but in my mind, having not been an athletic trainer, I think the thing that, when we first started working together, that having, as someone who went to the ex-phys program, and I was very knowledgeable about exercise science and pretty decent with anatomy and physiology, I think the biggest thing that was missing from my perspective is the idea of like where you kind of came in it with like more of like a holistic approach of the idea of like, and that's when we back when we were doing like that, started doing the FMS and things like that, some of these movement screens where it's like, hey, this athlete can't squat to parallel, which let's all just put out there, that is that even necessary first of all anyways, but let's assume that it is, that, this person can't squat to parallel. It's not because of what we typically were taught. It's something either up or down the chain. It's not just because their knees just don't bend anymore. Because if you have them lay on their back, they can actually pull their knees all the way up to their chest. So it's something up or down the kinetic chain. And I think that was the biggest thing too, that, probably right out of the gate, that I realized that you were more knowledgeable than me in, was looking at things like from the holistic approach, and kind of really that whole like almost Mike Boyle, like functional strength coach kind of mentality, which is something that I wasn't, I just wasn't as, when I was getting started, wasn't as aware of, because I was more, just coming from everything more segmented, and everybody kind of being in their own silos and things like that. And I think the biggest part of that is, aside from just the athletic trainers knowing a little bit more, just like looking at things from a medical lens. I think the other big factor is just the amount of required hours that you guys have to take. I think that's something, again, that, in my personal opinion, screws a lot of people over. Like every single person on this call, myself included, when we all graduated with our bachelor's degree or master's degree, we thought that we knew how to be a strength coach, and that's just not the case. Like I still don't know if I still don't know every day if I go home, if I'm like, yeah, I actually know what the hell I'm doing. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things that's 10 years of 60 hours a week. I don't know, do the math, whatever that is. That's a lot of hours of coaching on the floor, and greasing that groove of coaching, of the coaching eye. So it's one of those things where just because you're strong, and just because you had X Phys, and just because you spend time in the gym, or you read fucking Muscle and Fitness magazine or whatever it is, or you've watched, what's the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, Pumping Iron, just because you've watched that movie or whatever, doesn't mean that, or you played sport, doesn't mean that you know how to coach. And I think that's the biggest thing, that, again, athletic trainers, when you graduate, you know how to athletic train. When you graduate with a bachelor's or master's degree in X Phys, like, you don't know how to do X Phys. Like, how many of us, when we graduated, could we actually, without somebody else helping us, take somebody through a Bruce protocol, or do something like that? It's very rare that we actually know the amount of stuff that we're supposed to know, in my opinion, to actually operate at a high level. And I think that's because we wait until the final semester of our undergrad or master's programs to do internships. So to me, that's just, again, that's a flaw just in our system. And I agree with you. Like, we need to have probably some sort of better standardized test that's one big universal board certification, or whatever you want to call it. But so I kind of mentioned this, and I don't know, you didn't completely answer, but you started to an extent. So in your mind though, like, what, from a strength coach side now, having known what you know about from athletic training, like the injury aspects. I know that's something that everybody asks about, injury prevention. So kind of like, what's your, again, short, you can go as short or as long as you want, but what's your opinion on just injury prevention, injury mitigation, or is it a ghost that we're chasing anyway? And then also, from that standpoint, you mentioned about your injuries. I wasn't gonna throw you under the bus with those, but since you mentioned them, what do you look at, like, in terms of then return to play protocol with it, some sort of serious injury like that? Mentally, physically, like, what kind of things did you have to go through? What do you think athletes are going through situations like that? I know, we have some people on here that have had some season-ending injuries. Fortunately, I haven't, but I know we have some people on here that have. So first of all, injury prevention, like, is there actually something that we can or can't do? And then, what does that return to play protocol need to look like mentally and physically?
So injury prevention, right? As we all know, you can't necessarily prevent it, but I do think that you can decrease the likelihood for certain things. Now, there are certain catastrophic things. Somebody tackles you and your head's down, like, you're probably going to be injured. Like, sometimes you're just in a bad position and things happen, right? You can't prevent those. Um, Necessarily, like the whole Q angle kind of stuff being higher likelihood for ACLs. Like, is there some truth to that? Absolutely. But you can't basically throw everything into a bag. You can make people more efficient movers, that they have more problems to solve when they're in a bad area or situation, that they might get out of it. But there's also things that you can avoid. So I think that we could say decrease the likelihood of hamstring strains or muscle type stuff. Absolutely, if we build the right tolerance to it. But if a coach goes out and says, hey, we're doing a ton of hill sprints and we're doing some other stuff, and they already have their hamstrings roasted, they're definitely going to be more likely to do that. So from an injury reduction standpoint, knowing like what the body can handle, the loads, those type of things, we can actually handle a lot of that. But sometimes you randomly throw, say, a ball funny in baseball, and you do get tendonitis because of that, and you grip funny. Like, it happens. But we need to decrease the time for return to play, but also be smart about it too. using like myself and say Brandon with like his LCL and ACL type stuff, things are always getting better. I had 2 different surgeries, same surgeon on my right and my left. The one on my right, I was non-weight bearing for 8 weeks. The one on my left, I was only non-weight bearing for 2 weeks because they got better at understanding that. But tissue can only handle a certain load over time, right? The tendon and the muscle, okay, tendon takes a lot longer, so do ligaments to heal than the muscle. That's why people that take steroids and other stuff typically get tendon issues because their muscle gets stronger at a higher rate. Those things, right? We can reduce the likelihood of that if we change and increase the volume at a lower load, right? So, meaning if the muscle can handle 3 sets of 5 at 80%, right? The tendon might only be able to handle 3 sets of 1 at 80%, right? Which is 33% of the same load, meaning that, hey, maybe I shouldn't bump it up or maybe I shouldn't do that. Understanding those things is a huge difference. So the return to play, you just have to understand the relationship between what type of injury it is and how long you can recover. So like an ankle sprain, right? That's a ligament. It might take a little longer. The muscles can get you back out on the field sooner, but you might want to brace because you can't support yourself well statically as well. You can support yourself dynamically when the muscles contract and move to keep you in place, but statically you might be in a position and then you're kind of shit out of luck. That's where the bracing comes in. Then you return to play slowly out of that. Another thing for return to play and just the mental aspect, understanding season-ending injuries, like you understand they suck, but you have to take things for what they are, not what you want them to be. So understanding like, hey, what can you do? Right? I was on a rower 2 weeks. I was still in my post-surgery splint. I just put it on a roller and I still did stuff. You have to understand that you can still do stuff. And that's where some of the doctors go into play where they're so far left where it's like they know the surgery, they know that, but they don't understand the rest of the body where it's like, okay, yeah, I can still do this. And me training for cardiovascular endurance is actually going to help heal because now I'm getting some blood perfusion. I'm moving. Like there's studies that prove you get about 10% return from your injured to your non-injured side. So if I train my non-injured side, even 10% is better than zero. And you'll feel better because guess what? It's a whole cascade effect. One thing leads to the next. So if I am injured and I just sit around all day, right, everything rots, my muscles, my brain, right, my body in general. But if I move, I release endorphins, dopamine, I get this systematic thing where it's like, okay, now I can do better. So you just feel better. You're in a happier mood. So it's like, don't, what is it? Don't cut your nose off to spite your face or something like that. But the point is, you can't necessarily completely prevent injuries. I do think that you can reduce a lot of things and understand what's going on. So then you can properly rehab out of those. And again, typically your traumatic injuries are less preventable because shit happens. Your overuse and your muscle strains, I think you can decrease those. Certain people are more likely and we'll say predisposed due to levers or situations or sports to have those anyways. Using Jed as an example, right? Jed is a super twitchy guy, but he has a ton of strains. And the one thing that leads you to have more injuries, right, is previous history of injury. So if you strain your hamstring once, you're always going to be more likely for that to happen. So if you're training with somebody else and you did something stupid and you strain your hamstring, we just have to understand that you're always more likely to do that. So our injury mitigation is just to be aware of what's going on, right? The most important thing in the hospital and training is previous history, right? Previous history of training, previous history of whatever injury you have. Those things help make things better and understand what they are. Like if you have L4, L5 disc herniations, that doesn't mean that you're out forever. You just might do things a little bit differently or make sure you're braced, or you might have some lateral loading where it's like, all right, that's always what causes some irritation. So you load it a little bit so they can have some tolerance if they get there, but you don't load it a ton to where it takes it away to where they can't train anymore. Because at the same time, if you completely remove a stimulus to anything, muscles, tendons, ligaments, you lose the ability to be in that range. And what I mean by that is if I never do a bicep curl, right, and then one day I go and I decide that I should be fine, I go do that, I can't handle a high enough load. So I need to slowly build up to that, but I don't want to overdo it to where I get tendonitis or some other stuff. So like you guys should all look up Jefferson curl. You know, back, I mean, I'd say even 10 years ago, people were like, oh, don't do that. It's like, yeah, expose yourself to every range of motion under time. This is a thing I tell a lot of interns is there's no bad exercise. There's only appropriate. And you can see some people look at some of these crazy videos in other countries of people doing amazing things, but they built up over time to have the tolerance to do those things. And if you have an injury, your tolerance, you know, is reset back down. So you slowly build up off of that. That's why we have some people do all the warm-ups barefoot and then they put shoes on. That's why some people can do the whole workout without shoes. It's the tolerance level. And then some people can't handle walking, say, on the sides of their feet, right, on the outside. So then you slowly build up to that, and then they can walk on that, just like ballerinas walking on the tips of their toes. It takes time and tolerance to that, but not everything's healthy too. Nobody said that sport is healthy. So when we do sport, we're training people to say, some people get too far into prepare for battle, but part of it is you're preparing these people to handle a certain stressor load, right? Football's load, basketball's load, baseball load, soccer, softball. These are all different loads and different tasks. The whole goal is just to achieve this task, right? Soccer, put the ball in the back of the net. Okay, basketball, put the ball in the hoop. Football, put it in the end zone. Okay, how do I do that better? And it's just like Moneyball, where you're putting all these pieces together to allow people to do that. And if you have somebody that's injured, right, you guys have probably seen inspirational movies and videos where it's like, okay, well, this guy found a way to work. He worked around it, right? If look at the Special Olympics, you got these people that are losing or missing limbs and stuff, but they're still achieving the same task. It's just modified. And that's something to think about for injury, to prevention that doesn't really exist. How do I modify these things just to achieve whatever task? You just realize, like, okay, this is what I need to be done. How do I get that? And that same thing works with how we grew pro, with athletes, with all things in general. So you're like, I want to open my own gym one day. You also got to realize that task involves management, it involves hiring, it involves HR, it involves financial. And that's where a lot of people are not literate enough to understand, like, hey, financially, like when I first went to pro, the strength and conditioning department never made money. They didn't produce a profit till I got there after 2 years. And it takes time. And that's the thing, is that literacy, and that is super super important. So for you guys that ever want to open your own stuff, like, the nice thing in the collegiate sector, you have to do budgets, but at the end of the day, like, you don't have to make sure certain enrollments there. But when you own your own gym, like, there needs to be a certain member enrollment or your doors are closed and you're shit out of luck. So, and then that's other people's jobs, so it's a little different stress too. I know, a little tangent again, but take it away, Adam.
No, I actually did kind of have that as one of the questions at the end if we got to it, about just the management aspect of being at a place like pro, the private sector. But yeah, I think first and foremost, again, the injury thing. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I think we always, at least in our mind, if we think that we can do something to prevent injury, we should absolutely try to do it. And it's something that we should at least have that as a philosophy. And if things don't work out, they don't work out. And especially the catastrophic ones. There's sometimes where you just can't do anything about it. We have that new professor at Fairmont, and I was talking to him about force plates, and he was at UNC, and we were talking about maybe doing some pre-screening for some of our incoming athletes. And I got on the topic of our women's soccer team. Our women's soccer team has like 4 or 5 girls right now that have hurt knees. And he's like, look, I was at UNC, and they're whatever 15-time Division I women's soccer champions, national champions. He's like, when I was there, there was one point in time where they had 11 girls with ACLs on one team. I'm like, that is insane. Like, so it's one of those things where sometimes what also seems really bad when you're looking at it under a microscope, if you take a step back, it actually might be less than what the norm is, which again is scary to think about. But it's just one of the things where, like, if the norm is 6, 7, 8 girls and you're at 4 or 5, that might actually not be a bad thing. So it's just one of those things where sometimes you have to also take it kind of for what it's worth. And I think the return to play thing again is huge. I think getting up and moving, we talk about that a lot. Like, I always tell our athletes, like, if all 4 of your limbs were immobilized, if you're a quadriplegic, then you better have the most jacked neck, jaw, abs. Like, we're going to do something. We're going to find something for you to do. I don't want to know what you can't do. I want to know what you can do, and kind of work around things like that. So 100% agree with you. I think the worst thing you can do is sit around and mope about it. So last couple of questions here, because obviously we have a lot of young coaches on here that are all kind of trying to still figure out their path and everything. So what are some things maybe that when you were a young coach coming up that maybe made some mistakes on, or things that you just see some of the young coaches, interns that we have now, some of the things that they make mistakes on, and how to maybe avoid those mistakes, especially with the social media, like, glam and glitz of fake training. How do you what are some mistakes that you've made or other people have made that you think that we can maybe help save somebody from making the same mistakes?
I would say 2 of them here. One, don't overcoach. More is not better, better is better. 1 to 3 cues is really all people need to. If you can't get it within those, then you need to try something different. But doing 10 different corrections is going to make them think too much, and it's going to make things not athletic. So we need to be more efficient with it. Another thing is, like I said earlier, there's no bad exercise, only appropriate. I used to be more hard line, where it's like, this is a good exercise, this is a bad exercise, that's dumb, I can't believe people do that. Where it's like, the reality is, there is no, everything is gray, and that's something that's hard to realize. And as a young coach, I was more like, all right, this is dumb and that's great, and getting out of that mindset. And I think that's where we need to realize is there is more to coaching than just sets and reps. And that was a transition for me, especially at Cal, where I was like, okay, this is good. But there's more to it, because I'm always like, okay, well, what's anxious? Well, if I want to squat more, how do I do that? And it was just so microscopic where it's like I would only look at this one or two things and making it more systematic. And, you know, certain people come out and they think that this is always the way. And you see it with diets a lot where it's like, I'm keto, I'm carnivore, blah, blah, blah. And you see it in strength conditioning where people are like Olympic lifting, bodybuilding, like all these things there is no golden like ticket. All of it has its place, and you have to coach to what you know well. Like Olympic lifts are great, and I'll use it as an example, but I think there's more efficient ways to do stuff, and maybe for your own style, even your own setup. If you're in an Olympic weightlifting gym and you got a team that's there, okay, cool. You're going to have to go in and use that component. But at the same time, like if we're building athletes, we need to do athletic things, and we need to look at planes of motion, and we need to look at all these unilateral, bilateral, and it's like, how can we piece all these together to make athletes better? So realize things aren't hard lined where this is good and this is bad. Don't be afraid to test things, but don't scrap everything you do now for completely different thing. Pick one thing, add it to your program, and then over time it'll slowly adjust. Like I look back at some of my notebooks before I used Trainer Oak, like back in the day, like, oh, what did I do? And I'm like, okay, these are good. And then I'm like, oh, that's why I did that. That works better for that situation, right? Because that setup. But now what I have where I'm at now is different. For instance, in China, right? They don't really have gyms when I was over there. I was using bands and having people pick up heavy objects and freaking rocks and shit at the time. And I'm like, you just use the best thing that you can at the time. So it's like, okay, well, if I had all my program and wasn't adaptable and I only did Olympic weightlifting, I probably would have had people like clean and jerk rocks where it's like, all right, there's a danger of them dropping on their heads where it's like, okay, well, what's wrong with them doing a reverse lunge holding a rock, right? There's nothing. It's a little safer. So we have everything's layered. So as a young coach, just realize be creative, have fun with it. There's no necessarily right or wrong way. Listen to some of the people that are above you and they might give you some guidance. I don't like to give too many direct answers where it's like this or that, or like, oh, what do you think about this? And like, okay, well, what do you think? Because I want to see where your thought process comes from and let you work through that, because I could spout out information all day. That doesn't mean you're going to retain it well. So as a new coach, be hungry to learn new things, try new things, talk to coaches back and forth about things, and have some ideas and banter. Don't just look for direct answers, especially as a young coach. And again, it's not universally this has to be it. So when you coach, take all that stuff that's in your mind where it's like, I got 10 different things to say, and find the best one or two. If I see somebody squatting like shit and I know I can fix it, right? What's the biggest red flag? It's like, okay, well, if they're bent over but they're coming up on their toes, maybe the thing I need to do first is have them keep tension and tighten up their back. Now they might still be shifting forward, but the number one thing for them at that time is so they don't roll the bar over their neck and dump forward. So it's like, okay, yeah, they're still getting a little forward, but I'll fix that next. They get done with that set. We elevate their heels. They kept their back tight. Now we're golden. I don't need to tell them to do 10 different things because they're not ready for that. Right. Adam and I are going to go to jiu-jitsu in a little bit, where it's like when people are new, it's like drinking from a fire hose. And you're like, okay, you got this technique, and this combats that. Everything's situational, where it's like, all right, you just need to learn, like, these are frames. This is what you do. Strength conditioning is the same. It's like, here's your basic core movements. Have a thing to build off of. It's like, make your template, right? I can tell you what my skeleton template is right now and build it out and draw it on the whiteboard, where it's like, okay, right, I got a hip hinge, a squat, a push, a pull, right? And I can break those up into different things where it's like I have carries and I have the core moves in 8 different ways, but I also need to get unilateral, bilateral. I need to get my sagittal, frontal, and transverse plane. So if you draw it out, get really good at doing those things in your mind where you can spout them off, but build onto that. And I wasn't this good at it 10 years ago, but a little bit of work over time has allowed me to do that, right? That consistent exposure and consistent good exposure. You could be reading the wrong shit, and you'd be really good at the wrong thing. So that's what you use your other coaches for, some guidance, so that way you don't go too far on to the wrong end as well. But you still need to explore for yourself. So new coaches, explore yourself. There's no right or wrong, right? You just have to figure out what works best. Don't overcoach.
Yeah, I think for especially new coaches, but like myself included, for sure, the overcoaching thing was huge, and still can tend to be times where we want every rep to be, usually because we're really good. Where most strength coaches typically are kind of perfectionists, and we move really well. We have really good like movement competency or kinesthetic competency, whatever you want to call it. So like we expect everybody to just be able to do a perfect squat or a perfect clean like right out of the gate, and we kind of forget sometimes how hard that is for some people to figure out. So that's a big one for me as well. Like just in the simple fact of like, not everybody's going to be able to do a squat right out of the gate. And sometimes the best thing you can do is just, and I know like Tyler and some of these guys have heard me probably say this, is like, ask them what they're feeling. Like, don't feel like you have to jump in and say 1,000 things and then be like, hey, what are you thinking about when you're doing a squat? And they might not be thinking about anything, or they might be tell you what they are thinking about. And you're like, well, just don't think that, think this instead. So sometimes it's not always just trying to like spout at the mouth, like you said, fire hose coaching cues at them. Sometimes it's like, just hear what they have to say, watch them, let them mess up a little bit, as long as it's not, as long as they're not squatting like 315 and they're going to mess up, like let them mess up with lightweight on the bar and kind of feel it out and build those motor patterns and those motor skills and things like that. Is huge. And then I agree with you in the sense of like, don't just abandon ship on stuff either. It's I always ask the interns when we do the interview questions. I don't know if you know that. I even asked this, Ryan. I always ask them, like, if you could only do one exercise for the rest of your life, like what would it be and why? And it's interesting sometimes to hear some of their answers. But I think that's something very valuable, because it just kind of shows me where they're at. Like if the only thing that you would ever want to do is cleans, well, what do you do when you're 80 years old? Can you still do cleans? Like, or is it cleans now? You're literally picking up, whatever, a gallon of milk from the floor and putting it in the fridge, because that's kind of like the same movement as a clean, right? So it's one of those things where, that mentality. And I know when I was interviewing for a pro baseball job, one of the questions they asked me is, if I was on a deserted island, what 3 pieces of strength training equipment would I take with them? And I asked them, my first question to them was, well, can I count my body? And they're like, well, your body doesn't count, because that's not just a piece of equipment. I was like, well, then I get you just gave me a bonus piece of equipment. Now I got 4, right? Because now I got my body, so I can sprint and jump and do all that kind of stuff. And now whatever else I told him it was. So it's one of the things where, like, as a young strength coach, like, not getting caught up, like, and I don't want to say who it is, but we both know somebody that some of their students and interns, like, if you took an Olympic weightlifting barbell away from them, like, what would they even know how to coach? Like, they don't know how to coach any other movements other than snatch, clean and jerk, front squat, back squat. Like, and that's not a good thing. Like, you need to be able to coach other things, because especially for a lot of us, like, we're going to be, we either had jobs or we're going to have jobs where you're not in an Olympic style weight room. You're going to be in a Planet Fitness, and you're going to have to train grandma who on just machines. Like, how can you get that done? Or just kettlebells? Like, how can you get that done? So I think that's a huge aspect of just not throwing everything out the window, but also not being glued to one specific type of programming, not just being a west side barbell person, because that's not always going to be practical. Like, it's just not. So, all right. So then, kind of a follow up to that, and this will maybe be the last one. I'll let somebody ask some questions. Um, when obviously at pro, you guys working a lot with like youth athletes and things like that. Long-term athletic development is kind of that buzzword. Like, what is kind of the central tenet for you in terms of, hey, we get a 12-year-old kid who doesn't even really matter what sport they are, even really how much potential they are, but assuming they're consistent and they're motivated, like, what is kind of that 6-year plan look like to the time they're 18, to if they end up going to play college sports? Like, what is probably some of the biggest, I guess you could say, consistencies between the ones that end up being successful and the ones that don't, that kind of like peter out? What's your thought process in terms of like scheduling out basically the next 6 years of their life?
Well, I think that's the thing is we don't try to schedule it out. We just take things for what they currently are, because who knows what's going on in 6 years. So we're looking at it months at a time, and we go back to that skeleton of what do they move? What are these patterns? We give them a wide array of movements to test them. Look at Sydney Smith, for example. She was going to go play hockey at Penn State back in the day, but then new coach staff, she's like, you know what, I'm going to go here for free. So our initial training plan with her was make her as good of a goalie as possible. And she was super agile and was able to move really well. She still is, but that kind of changed where it's just general health and fitness. So you have to know how to train all these things and change them. So it's like, what's your core? Like, what are you trying to achieve out of these athletes? And the youth, it's just get them to move well, right? Middle school is teach them all the different exercises so they can figure out what they like to do, because then you can program more of what they like to do. If some kid hates back squats, we still have to squat, but he might love Zercher squats for some odd reason. Guess what? They get to do more of that. So it's then picking and choosing. So sports season. So in high school, they might play 1 or 2 different sports. So you're trying to develop those traits that help them with 1 or 2. In college, they're playing 1. Very rarely are they playing 2. So it's like that progression. So it slowly builds into that pyramid, and you're just, how do you get the best traits out of them, right? With baseball guys, you're maybe not trying to make them perfectly symmetrical, especially a pitcher. So it's like, how do I help them achieve certain movement patterns that allow them to be as whippy as possible? Or maybe they're more of a strength guy in, say, football, and you're trying to build more muscle mass on them so they can take more impact. It just uniquely wherever they're at, I would say, is there's always a long-term plan, but it really just that undulating where you're taking it weeks and months at a time, and you just have to adjust what they're doing. I say the biggest factor of whether kids stick with it or not and consistency isn't necessarily the strength and conditioning, because a lot of kids love what we do and they just enjoy the environment. It's the parents and the coaches of the actual sport that ruin it for them, because they're treating them like little adults, right? And the kids aren't adults. They still have to develop. They don't have the mental capacity to make some of the mature decisions. You can get mad at them, but like, you got to remember, like, they're 10, 12, 14 years old. They're going to do a lot of dumb things. Like, we did a lot of dumb things at that age. And I think a lot of these coaches are over coaching them, again, going back to that, and they're not allowing these kids to actually develop and make mistakes. So allow them to make mistakes and strength conditioning, build them as a whole person, have those hard conversations with athletes. That's something else we do, is we build the whole person, both mentally and physically, where it's like you have real conversation with them. You're tough on some and you're soft on others, and you're making them and you're filling the gaps of what they need. Don't treat some of these athletes like many adults or people that are 30 or 50 that are super mature, at least for the younger crowd. In college, people are still trying to learn how to become, young men and women to be better for society. That's really what high school and college is supposed to prepare you for, is how to be a good member of society, right? Otherwise, you just have anarchy.
Yeah, and it's funny. And I had to go on Trainer Rogue to double check, because there's one person that I can specifically think of that I, as a young coach, like would absolutely like lose my mind on. And I'm not gonna say his last name, but Corey, you know who I'm talking about. He was one of my very first personal training clients at Pro that I ever got, and he was a great kid. Had a good family. And his whole goal when he was in, I think I started training him in like 6th or 7th grade. His whole goal was just to literally make the middle school basketball team. Unfortunately, he never did. He was just not good enough. Like, he just wasn't. He started playing basketball way too late. He wasn't good enough. And he's the one that I always kind of, if you guys ever hear me talk about the whole chewing gum, walking and chewing gum analogy, he was that example. Like, he could not walk and chew gum. He was so unathletic. But looking back at it now, what I was able to help him with, and then what Cody was able to help him with, and now I'm not sure who works with him now, but I see him still logging sessions on Trainer Oak, and he's probably a sophomore in college now, somewhere around that.
Sophomore, junior, yeah. Tyler usually sees him late in the evenings because he still comes late. And
Yeah,
this kid's had a hard life too. Like, his
yeah,
mom literally passed away from a tree falling onto their house.
yeah.
Like,
So
crazy stuff.
he's had some definitely some difficulties and some adversity and things like that. And like I said, he never gotten to play for his school basketball team. He played like some club basketball and like whatever you want, like whatever it is, like the church league type basketball and things like that. But it's one of those things where, like, I look back at that and like he's one of those, of all the athletes that I've worked with that have played in the MLB and played in the NFL and played in the NBA. Like, he's one of those people that I'm like, I'm just as proud of him for learning how to squat and learning how to deadlift and learning how to do cleans. Like, I used to literally want to go home and blow my brains out because he was so bad at doing power cleans. And I'm like, but looking back, and that was one of the things Ryan said to me a long time ago, was like, well, why are you teaching a 7th grader how to do power cleans? Like, why does he need to know how to do power cleans? Like, he can't even walk and chew gum right now. So it's one of those things where, that's a great example of just that long-term athletic development. But really what it was for him was, it was just long-term human development. Really, it's just making him a better person. So I always, anytime I get on the Trainer Rogue and I see Corey Austin log this session, it's like it always, like, I don't know, it makes me smile a little bit, because he's just such a important part of just my coaching career. So Tyler, I appreciate you for continuing to work with him, and tell him I said hi. Hopefully I'll see him one day this summer. So we're at 11 o'clock. Anybody have any, one or two questions here before we get Ryan out of here? Because I know he's got a place to go. So. Nobody has any questions?
Well,
all right. Well, Ryan, appreciate it. I'll see you here in about an hour. And then, but yeah, like I said, appreciate it. And like I said, thank you for everything that you've done for me. And thank you for, literally 1, 2, 3 people plus another one that's on here right now that you're going to work with. And then probably about 10 others that were invited that will listen to this. You've had some sort of impact on them. So, myself included. So appreciate that. And it's good talking with you. And, if anybody has any questions, you can reach out to Ryan. I can get you his email or his cell phone number. Follow Pro Elite Strength on Instagram and stay in touch. So, all right, Ryan, thank you.
Yeah.